Ankur was one of the co-founders of Teachable and sold it for $250 million. This is a bit different, but I think an important video. Social media makes it seem like people that are successful are all driving Lambos and setting money on fire. There is a sample bias, but everyone I know that's worth 8 or 9 figures are all pretty normal, and they're still just trying to use points to save money on flights. With that said, big favor before we dive in is to give this a thumbs up to help the algorithm, given that it is a bit different and probably won't do well, so it does help it show up. And if you are new to this channel, you want to learn more about credit cards and how people think about money, then consider subscribing. Okay, starting off, would love to learn more about your background.
I was born in India and moved, my parents lived in Oman in the Middle East, so I had a very third culture upbringing where you're originally from India, never lived there, grew up in Oman, never quite belonged there, but moved to America at the age of 17 with the dream or whatever of being a software engineer like any good Indian kid. That dream lasted about one summer, where the summer after my freshman year I started interning at Amazon and found it completely soul-crushing to work in a cubicle with a team working on a very small part of a very small product. It was literally the definition of, being a cog in a wheel. But that summer also coincided with my first dabble with tech entrepreneurship when Facebook launched the Facebook app platform, when anyone could build an app on Facebook. And I started by building, silly quizzes and games and stuff. And by the end of that summer, I was making about, $20 a day. But that $20 a day was a taste of freedom. And after that, I could never go back to working for anyone else again.
Can you touch on Teachable and that entire experience?
Fast forward a couple of years. At this point, I was 23 years old. I just moved to New York City. I tried different startup ideas. Nothing was quite gelling, but I decided to pass the time by doing a little bit of teaching. So I was teaching on Udemy. I was teaching in-person classes at General Assembly, and it made me realize that there was a big opportunity in online education. And like any other teacher on these platforms, I was able to get a few $1,000s a month, but I couldn't actually scale my business, which led me to build the first version of Teachable as a side project for myself and my buddy, simply because we needed a place to host our courses where we controlled everything. So it was born out of a side project, which ended up working first for us. We started making a few $1,000s a month, then offered it to other people, and 6 months later, we had a handful of customers making real money, and we're like, man, this could be an actual company. And ended up going to Silicon Valley, raising around, and building Teachable.
Was it really easy to grow Teachable, or was it a pretty difficult process?
Startups take a really long time, and it's very, very easy to underestimate how much time it takes. So in October 2013, it was a little side project. It took us about 6 months to get to our first dollar in recurring revenue. And from that point onwards, it took us about 18 months to get $1 million in ARR. So collectively, that's 2 years till you get to the point of $1 million in ARR. After that, we definitely found something that worked and were able to accelerate, but it still took us, I want to say, about 7 years from inception till we sold the company, at which point it was about 50 million in ARR. But yeah, it was quite the journey.
Okay, so you decided to sell Teachable. Can you touch on that whole thought process? Because I think it is a pretty unique one. Most people don't have the behind the scenes for $250 million transactions.
It was a culmination of factors. I think the biggest reason I ended up selling the company is the fit just made sense. We partnered with a company called Hotmart in Brazil, and everything about that company seemed perfect. One, they had the exact same vision and way of looking at the world, where similar product, different market, global ambitions. But moreover, the company was run by 2 founders that had built it and were continuing to run it. So being able to be absorbed by a founder-led and founder-driven company was very, very attractive, especially given, how much we had in common and how much the combination made sense.
I think there's a joke that startups don't get sold, but they get bought. Was that the case for Teachable as well?
So to give you context, we were never trying to sell. At no point were we, running a process or anything. This opportunity came in inbound, and it coincided with also, us being at the 7-year mark where, frankly, I was also, tired and burnt out. And the combination of the fact that this seemed like the perfect fit and my own founder energy was sort of, depleting, made it make complete sense, and, really, really glad it went the way it did.
Okay, so how did you end up spending your first $1 million?
I was fortunate enough to actually make money when I was in college. So I had made $1 million by the time I was 21, and I was probably the most responsible 21-year-old with $1 million in the world. I had very few frivolous purchases. I bought an iPod or something, really that I could have afforded without that as well. But no, when I was young, ended up buying an apartment in San Francisco in the building that is now sinking, ironically enough. And that was, sort of not an irresponsible purchase, still a very responsible purchase, but like, it was a luxurious building and really nice apartment and stuff like that. That's what I did the first time around.
Or I guess, what was your first purchase after the acquisition?
After selling Teachable, I think I definitely was able to, help family out and stuff like that. But there's very little kind of silly stuff I did. But also, picture this, right? I sold the company in March 2020. The money hit my bank account in April 2020. So again, the most first world of all problems. But imagine you've worked really hard, you have all this money, you can go celebrate, but the entire world is in lockdown. I could do nothing. I spent the first 2 months after the acquisition sitting in my 400 square foot apartment, mostly by myself. But after that, no, I think the one thing I do spend money on and have continued to is I've been traveling a ton. And as much as, I romanticize the idea of, staying in a bunch of hostels as at the time, 31, 32-year-old, I think that ship sailed. So I definitely do spend money traveling, both for myself and with family.
Okay, so after all of this, you decided to settle down in Brooklyn. Can you touch on that thought process?
I bought a house in Williamsburg, and Williamsburg is sort of, it's a community for me. I mean, a couple of my closest friends in the world live here. And as much as I enjoy traveling, it's really nice to have a place to come back to. I don't yearn for the, live out of a suitcase life. Like, it's really nice to have a kitchen and stuff like that. The other reason buying this house made a ton of sense is something I'm very conscious of is my parents, a lot of people's parents are aging, and I want to have the opportunity to spend more time with them every single year. No matter how much time I spend with them at this point, I'm not going to regret it. So by buying a house, they've been able to come here, stay with me for multiple months at a time. There's enough space that people, don't get in each other's way, and it's been really nice to spend that much time with my family. It's the longest I've spent with them since before college. So having a place really helped with that.
Okay, so you just started a new company. Can you talk about how you got to that idea and also what the company does?
Called Ocho, and the vision behind Ocho is we want to help business owners build wealth. We think that most business owners spend so long working on their business, they neglect their personal finances, and we want to help them do better there. So we're doing that in two ways. One, we're building financial products to make it easy for people to build wealth, starting with a retirement plan for self-employed people. The second product is an education product that helps business owners demystify this really, really complicated tax code and use it to their benefit. A lot of people don't know this, but the single biggest tax hack there is out there is to own your own small business in America. So there's so many opportunities for business owners, and that's what we're trying to highlight.
One of the other benefits of Ocho is that if you are a user of the main product, you pretty much get a library card to a repository of experts. So for example, I have a course on Ocho that's an intro to credit cards for business owners. And there's pretty much the SEBI for angel investing, for taxes, and everything else. If you do want to check out Ocho, I'll link it down below. One of the best tools out there if you're a business owner or if you're an aspiring business owner. Last year, you had a pretty controversial tweet about moving to a place to save on taxes, specifically New York compared to New Jersey. I think we're on the same page because we're founders and we live in San Francisco, but would love to get your thoughts.
When you are trying to start a tech company, it is one of the hardest things in the world. You're trying to create something when nothing existed, and every single thing in the world is an obstacle. So you're gonna want to do everything in your power to slightly maximize your chances of success. So if that means living in a city with higher taxes, so be it, right? You're trying to do such a hard thing that is really, really, really almost impossible. So from a founder's perspective, tax rates don't matter. The people for whom tax rates do matter, it sometimes does annoy me in that there's a lot of very unhappy rich people where for me, the point of having money is to not have to stress about it. And if you are independently wealthy but have moved to Puerto Rico to keep marginally more money, what is the point of what you're doing, right? Money is a tool to help you live the life you want. Your life is not a tool to make the most amount of money. And I think a lot of people don't get that. And to me, it's being penny wise, pound foolish. You're rich, but what's the point if you're living in New Jersey? And by the way, I'm kidding. Some people love New Jersey, but yeah, that was definitely controversial. A lot of people from Jersey were not happy.
So out of curiosity, what does your monthly expenses look like?
In general, not super expensive taste, but at the same time, at this point, I don't think about anything I want to spend money on. So I would imagine the biggest thing I spend money on is travel, wherever. I usually now travel business class. A lot of it is, through credit card points and the like. So spend a lot over there. My house I own outright, so I don't have a monthly sort of payment over there. And then, yeah, just going out in New York City. I mean, nice dinners and stuff. Very often when I'm with people, I'll pick up the check. But I would still say, I would guess my overall expenses, which is higher than it's ever been in my life, is, I don't know, it's like high thousand, like high four figures a month, which is crazy, but not like completely outrageous considering I could afford to spend much more.
Did you consider getting the Centurion card, or was it something that didn't make sense?
Like, I mean, I think in life we all do things for status implicitly, but I think when there are things that people do for status so explicitly, I find that a bit of a turnoff where I don't, it was not attractive to me just for the sake of having it because like the math didn't make sense. If the math made sense, I would, and I'm not saying I never will in the future, but I think like as humans, we have to acknowledge what we do for status and sort of be careful to not tip too far where you sort of become a parody of yourself or a parody of what, a wealthy person should be like. So for that reason, I've kind of stayed away from it.
We kind of touched on this already, but would love to get some insight on whether you noticed your budget increasing a lot after the Teachable acquisition.
Yeah, I definitely spend more money now, but probably like not by an order of magnitude, probably by less than 2x if you exclude sort of what I spend on other people, like family. So it has gone up, and it's really gone up by giving me the freedom to not think about it. To me, the point of having money was to not think about it. I can go to a restaurant and order what I want and not have to think about it, and that to me is the value, right? It's not the fancy things because I don't really care for the fancy things. So that has been beneficial. Just not having to sweat the small stuff like room service. I don't care about if I order room service. Things like that. And it's made all the better by the fact that was not my life growing up. And what's also really fun is I'm able to like take my parents and family out for a vacation where they get to experience these things for the first time, which is really fun. Like for whatever reason, let's say I grew up in a wealthy family where my parents were already used to that, it would be so much less fun than to like be able to like be with them and like watch them experience this joy for the first time.
One of the most controversial expenses, especially if you go on places like Reddit, is Equinox. What's your thought process?
I've had an Equinox membership for 6 or 7 years. It's probably the longest relationship in my life right now. I've had it for, since I think when I was making $100,000 a year living in New York City. It was a huge amount to spend on a gym membership. But to me, it's, again, anything that like makes you healthier and work out more, it's completely worth it. Specifically in this very moment, I have a pet peeve that they've oversold Williamsburg memberships, so I'm at the risk of churning, but that's the only reason. Otherwise, I mean, I do have an Equinox membership. I also have a Soho House membership, which I think is one of the more stupid ones I have, since the math on like how many times I've actually gone versus what I pay is right now just not working out.
Out of curiosity, do you have a car?
I do have a car. Right after I sold the company, it was 2020. It was hard to like do a lot of stuff, but I wanted to go surfing. So I bought a secondhand car despite selling my company because I couldn't justify, buying a new car. But I have it, and I use it a reasonable amount just because I live in Brooklyn and the outer boroughs, it's still quite useful.
One of the biggest debates is whether you should focus on making more money or saving money. Where do you fall on that?
I think there's a stage for everything. I think your 20s are probably not the time to like work really, really hard to save marginally more money because one, it's your 20s, like you should have fun in your 20s, but two, that time is better spent trying to think of ways that will accelerate your career and make much more money. But let's say as you get closer to retirement, not all the way there, I think the balance starts switching. And I still think like learning about money is something you should do early. Like one of the big mistakes I made is I made a bunch of money when I was, 20, 21. And at this point, that is, 2010. And I left most of it in cash or like in really bad fixed income type stuff when I didn't like ride one of the biggest stock market waves in history, right? Like, because no one told me holding money in cash is stupid. I thought I was being responsible. So I think financial education is important young, but early on, you're better off optimizing, trying to figure out how to either accelerate your career, learn skills, start something versus like, trying to like save 10% of your salary, which is going to be lower when you're 20 than you're 30.
One of the tweets you've made is about how if you're not making like at least 4 or 5% from each of your accounts, you pretty much like need to move it around. How do you invest your money?
Yeah, so that was specifically something I realized myself. I had some money sitting with Chase and interest rates at the time were, 4%. T-bills are paying 4.5%. Like your risk-free rate is 4.5%. Chase was paying 0.01%. I was like losing money just by like leaving money in my Chase account. And I talked to a lot of friends. They have the same sort of thing. So, and for a lot of us, it's the first time in our lives that like the risk-free rate is something meaningful, right? For most of what we can remember, it didn't matter. So it was sort of just a reminder to people people to make sure their cash is like not parked anywhere silly. In terms of how I manage my money, I've taken a big percentage of it, roughly I would say 50%, but it's also the amount that I think is like enough to protect generational wealth or whatever. And that is roughly indexed into the broader stock market. I mean, it's like, I think 80% S&P, 20% like international and small cap or whatever. And that's the money I kind of don't want to ever touch, right? It just sort of is like safe. It's like pretty safe. It's safe enough for my age and the fact that I don't have dependents and all of that. So that's like the thing I'm going to protect. The other 50% is something I invest in things that I either believe I have an edge in or things that I enjoy. So for me, a lot of it is put into like early stage startups and multiple funds I've started, which works out well for me. My original tendency was to be more conservative, but my dad actually pushed me to take more risk, being like, he's like, you're in your early 30s, you have no dependents. No one in our entire like generational like lineage has had the chance to build something really massive. Like take more risk. What are you waiting for? So that's what I do right now.
What were the biggest lessons you had from your parents?
The biggest lesson my parents have imparted has been to like at every stage like dream bigger and like push to a greater level than I previously thought possible. And I think it's because in a lot of ways, again, no one came from that background. So the fact that I'm here feels a little bit like playing with house money. Like, you've been gambling and you're up so much that at this point, like you may as well go for broke. And I think that has been a really good lesson. There have been times, especially when right before starting Teachable, where I'd spent a couple of years trying different startup ideas, nothing was working. And my mom wanted me to get a safe, reliable job. And my dad was like, don't do that. Like, I made that decision in my life so that you would not have to. Like, go build the thing you want to, go be your own boss, and, don't sort of abandon that dream. So that's been very helpful.
As weird as this probably sounds, I've seen some East Asian parents tell their kids to go back to school, even after a 10 or 100 million acquisition. Was that the same case for you?
Nope. After selling Teachable, my parents' singular focus has turned to my personal life. It's become like, when are you going to get married? When are you going to have kids? Now I tell them about how my company is going, and my dad's like, have you been on any dates this week? Like I don't care about like your professional stuff. That part's like sorted. When am I going to be a granddad? So no, they've definitely changed focus, but not in the direction towards education.
One of the things we suggest to our founders is to have your parents on the updates. Is it something you still do with Ocho?
My parents are still on my company updates. My parents still reply to my company updates. I've told my dad, though, do not reply to reply to my personal Gmail, right? But my dad's retired now, doesn't have a lot going on, and as usual, thinks he can run my own company better than I can. So yeah, it's definitely something they do.
For anyone looking to start a business or who has a startup, what tips do you have for them?
I think if you want to start something and you have a stable job, especially if it's like a tech job where you likely don't work that hard, I think you can do it on the side. I think you can get to a point where you can taste and dabble with entrepreneurship and building something without sort of going all the way. I know a lot of people like push you to quit everything and start from scratch, but a lot of people think they want to start something, don't actually want to start something, and when it comes time to do the work of starting something, they realize that. So I think it's better to do it while you still are earning some income, are less stressed about it, and then when you start seeing results or you start having conviction that this is what you want to do, then leaving and doing it.
Obviously, you're in a pretty unique position, but where do you want to see Ocho in the next 5 years?
So the bigger vision behind Ocho is, can we help people make better financial decisions than they currently do? Can we build a trusted brand, a trusted institution that people trust with their like livelihood and their earnings and sort of their wealth? The closest parallel I've found is probably what Charles Schwab did in the 1970s, where back in the day all the brokers were selling terrible products to customers because they earned like the biggest commissions. Schwab came in being like, we're not going to pay our salespeople any commission. We believe our customers are smart people. We're going to let them direct how they want to invest and trade. And in the process, they built sort of a generational brand. Like Schwab right now is $150 billion company, and it's so much newer than all the other sort of big financial institutions. So even though today we think of them as a boomer company, back in the day they were an upstart that changed how people related to money, and that's what we want to do. And I think no one has quite done that. I think Robinhood had the opportunity but sort of went in a different direction. But if everything goes to plan, that's what our goal is.
In the same vein, do you see Ocho as your life's work?
I think like the idea of helping people make better financial decisions is my life's work. Today that is Ocho. In the future it could take different forms. But I think, like having the experience I did where I came to America as a first generation immigrant, didn't learn anything about money, then discovered how the tax code works, and you go like, wow, this whole thing is kind of a scam. And if you can't change it, at least, empowering people to learn more about it, I think is a bold enough mission that, yeah, I want to dedicate the rest of my life to it.
Since I do a lot of angel investing and venture investing through Roadrunner, one thing we've started to see is the combination of AI and finance. How do you see that going?
I think AI and finance is interesting, but I would tread a little bit slowly just because something I have learned in a way that I did not expect is when it comes to people's money, they need to feel comfortable with other humans, especially when it comes to talking about it. And that's interesting because that's not how I feel. Like I would be totally fine, having an algorithm optimize everything. I would almost prefer that. I prefer to not have to get on a video call and chat with someone, but it's been very evident that I am in the minority, and a lot of people, want to know who is the person signing off on this. So I think for the near-term future, what that looks like is AI is going to help generate a lot of first drafts on the back end and come up with a lot of default strategies, but will still eventually be signed off by a human for quite a while. But at some point, I think the tide could shift. I mean, the same way like right now, an index fund is entirely automated. It's not even AI. So I do think there will be a lot of innovation in that area.
On the note of venture, one of the common complaints I've seen is that if you look across the whole industry, the returns are not as good as the S&P 500. On one hand, there are a lot of funds that are one and done, while other ones have a ton of institutional money. So endowment money and even like foreign governments because they're that good. Do you think people should angel or venture invest?
Firstly, I think there's a lot of confusing returns on venture funds. Like I think they've been based on the data source, I've seen the data manipulated to say lots of different things. At the same time, I would not put a lot of your money as a percentage into startup investing unless you either believe you have a competitive advantage, which I do. I'm probably wrong, but I do believe that. Or two, you just really, really enjoy the work that goes into it and think about it as a learning and everything else. Because just from a returns perspective, you're better off thinking about it as an alternate part of your portfolio, which might be capped at 5 or 10% of your overall money. Again, for me, I think I have a competitive advantage there, and I kind of want to shoot for a bigger outcome, so it makes sense. But yeah, just objectively, I see some people who are like, my portfolio is 50% Bitcoin, 50% startups, and that's terrifying. You probably don't want to be doing that.
Kind of similar, but do you think everyone should start their own small business or startup?
I think more people should start businesses than those that start today, but it's not a rule that everyone should do. You shouldn't watch videos about everyone should start a business and feel guilty if that's not something you want to do. The other thing it's very worth reiterating is there's a lot of different businesses and a lot of great businesses that never will be venture backed and should not be venture backed. Venture backing can also be really, really painful. It can be a slow sort of death march to make you do things you don't want to. And there's plenty of phenomenal businesses that do not need that. So I do think more people should start a business because once you taste that freedom, it's very hard going back to anything else, but you also shouldn't feel guilty about it if that's not a calling you feel.
Okay, last question. Where do you fall in this chicken wing scale?
I think I'm like a 3 or 4. I would say a 3.5, both before and after acquisition. Yeah, 1 is just bad. Who would do that? Yeah.
Again, if you want to check out Ocho, I'll link it down below. And if you want to learn about any cards like the Chase Sapphire Reserve or the MX Platinum, we'll also put those down below. As always, make sure that the cards and the products are competitive, that they make sense for you, but otherwise, it is a huge way to support the channel, so thank you guys in advance. If you made it to this point in the video, leave a chicken emoji in the comments down below, and I'll try to heart it and also respond. My question's for you: are you surprised about the credit cards he has, and also his views on money? Let me know and everyone else know in the comments down below. Big favor, give this a thumbs up, consider subscribing, but otherwise, hope you guys liked it. See you guys next time.